Congratulations, you have discovered another meta egg, your home for insane film theory. This is you can call us Darth Jar Jar's summer home. Today, as usual, we're talking about the meta aspects of film and movies. And one of the best places to start explaining meta egg's philosophy about that is to talk about the very influential science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Who? Now, some might not know what a dickhead is, but a dickhead is basically a fan of Philip K. Dick. And we have, please forgive me, I hope this isn't derogatory, but one of the biggest dickheads on the planet with us today by the name of David Gill. Now, see, look, he even put his moniker as total dickhead. Wonderful. Now, please, for those people who, the individuals who don't, let's start here. First,
Okay.
Introduce who you are and why you do what you do.
Oh, Jesus. All right. That's a tough one. My name is David Gill. I've taught writing and literature at San Francisco State University for almost 20 years. Prior to that, I was a dickhead. What got me really into literature was Philip K. Dick. Like a lot of people, I had a roommate who turned me on to this book. We were all potheads, and Scanner Darkly was this hilarious book about these potheads in the future. And hey, they talk just like us, and yet there's this cool conspiracy. And anyway, it was sex and drugs and rock and roll and science fiction, which really spoke to me. And so I was instantly a fan, and I was just a fan. You know, I was just reading it as entertainment. It's, wow, this guy's really cool. It's really far out. That was a way to think about it. And when I got to University of Hawaii in 1996 or 7, 1998, I stumbled into a class that was teaching Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep alongside The Wasteland and The Great Gatsby as like a great work of American literature. And thematically, this professor put it all together where, there's essentially Fitzgerald admitted that that Gatsby was a kind of an homage, a kind of prose form of what Eliot was doing in his poem. And so there's obvious elements there, but the interesting thing is there's this stuff about dust and the sort of sterile world and the lack of reproduction and all the stuff that actually gets into Children of Men and all that kind of really interesting stuff. Right. Anyway, I got into Dick then as like a literary figure, and I got into studying like the hermeneutics of literature. And I ended up at San Francisco State University pursuing a master's degree in literature, and going at the time driving around to different spots in where Dick lived and checking out different houses where he lived. And after I got my master's degree, I considered taking a PhD, and had a mentor tell me, just be a scholar. And I'm sure what they meant was, submit papers to the prominent journals and write, interesting things and try to get published. And my idea was to start a blog in 2007 called The Total Dickhead. And, it picked up a lot of momentum. There's a lot of interest in Dick at the time. And he got, just after I finished my master's degree, where I had difficulty finding a reader to take him seriously enough to allow me to write a master's thesis on him. Immediately after that, he was in the Library of America, and suddenly, the New Yorker was paying attention to him. And so it was right place, right time, kind of like Phil Dick in some ways. And so I sort of rode that blog, the Total Dickhead notoriety, to have the opportunity to meet and interview a couple of Phil's ex-wives. I worked on the exegesis with Jonathan Lethem and Pamela Jackson and Eric Davis. Organize these Dick fests and you name it. I basically spent my last 20 years obsessed with this guy, and I've run the gambit of from a fan to a critic to kind of super fan, a kind of literary, like a champion of his literary merits, to a kind of super critic who's really down and bummed out by some of the aspects of his personal life. When conventional education at San Francisco State University started to sour last year, I decided to put together this course. And so I basically cultivated this 2 decades worth of dickdom, as I like to call it. And I had
Jesus.
all kinds of guests. I know. Don't look that up on the internet. You'll get something totally different. But I had a ton of guests like Jonathan Lethem and Eric Davis and Linda Levy and Tim Powers. And it was really incredible. And we just concluded. And in the course of that class, 16-week course, we read 2,500 pages of Phil Dick, which is, something like 12 or 14 novels, and, covered his life in depth. It's like 64 hours of recorded material. I spent about half the time lecturing on what we did was 2 nights a week. And on Tuesday night, I would spend an hour talking about his biography and an hour talking about a book. And then on Thursday nights, we'd have 2 hours with a guest. And so, it was a lot. It really challenged people's sort of stamina. And I've been thinking about it. Even in graduate school, it was rare that you would take a 16-week class dedicated to a single author. The only author I'm sure I studied for a full 16 weeks was William Shakespeare. And interestingly enough, there was almost no discussion of his biography in that class. So it's it's not exactly a college course. There's no exams and no papers. And it's probably more biography heavy than most literary courses would tend to be. But it was essential for the kind of synthesis that you have to develop to study Phil Dick really deeply, to study the work, to see the way his life and work resonate with one another.
So, as an introduction to someone who has no idea who Philip K. Dick is like one of those weird individuals who's a household name without being known in the house.
Yeah.
Sort of like he's in every house, but you might not know he's there.
He's a household name that's a stranger. I love it. Yeah. So Philip K. Dick was born in 1928 in Chicago, and has a sort of tragic backstory. He was a twin and born to inexperienced parents, and kind of emotionally divorced from the reality sort of parents. And they sort of, through neglect and ignorance, allowed his twin sister to die prematurely at 6 weeks of age. And so that really haunted him. And it really sort of tore apart the family, blah, blah, blah. Let's fast forward to the 1950s. Phil is living in Berkeley. He's agoraphobic, sort of incredible nerd, sitting at home reading, writing science fiction, corresponding with writing to the science fiction magazines. A sort of materialist, a leftist, a agnostic or atheist, probably depending on which day you ask him, and someone who's critical of people who fall under the spell of particular ideologies. And so this young guy, instead of going to ROTC, or instead of going to UC Berkeley like all of his friends were, he drops out. He says because he can't do ROTC. He's got agoraphobia. He has panic attacks. I think probably in today's terminology, they'd say he's on the spectrum. He's definitely neurodivergent, I guess is the better way to put it. And he reads these panic attacks and difficulty with school with basically his unconscious telling him he doesn't belong there. He needs to do something else with his life. And he does. He stays at home and he writes science fiction until he starts selling it. And he hits a boom in the science fiction market, and he can churn out science fiction stories, and he makes a living at it. And so from like 50, boy, I don't want to get my years wrong here, but let's say, the early through the mid 50s, he's writing these short stories, and just to the point where he's got, 5 or 6 out in a month. And in a couple of cases, he's writing, they put it under pen names, so you don't see Philip K. Dick twice in a single issue or right next to each other on the newsstand. Eventually he
mostly pop magazines.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Just pulp. Right. I should point out. Yes, thank you.
Pulp all like was the thing back then. The
Yeah.
zines were a bigger thing than they are now.
This is pulp stuff, and at the same time he has these literary ambitions where he's writing mainstream fiction. He looks down in some ways on science fiction the same way that his peers do. At the same, you'll see him express those kinds of opinions in interviews. At other times, he's a real champion of science fiction. Anyway, in order to sort of produce the work at this breakneck speed, he increases the use of amphetamines he'd been given as a kid taking for his asthma. And one of the things I saw in the class was really the effect of those amphetamines over time. And so if you go and look at the earliest novels and you work your way through, you can see, I mean, I subjectively, it's hard to say that they're worse, but they're looser. They're less meticulously put together. They don't, I don't know, the control. In some ways, he gets to be a better writer, and he gets control of his work in new ways. He's able to do things he wasn't able to do as a young writer, but there were things he was able to do as a young writer that I don't think he could do later in life because of the effects of the amphetamines on his brain. But that's a kind of controversial opinion, and I
don't know, man. Like,
I'm certainly.
Some of his most meticulous work is his last couple of novels.
I tend to agree with you. I know. But all right. So in Valis, which I think is a beautifully constructed novel, it's probably his high point. There's a 2-page discussion where Sherry, the cancer patient, rattles off her knowledge of World War II tank history. And it's inconsistent with her character. And I don't think that would fit in... that would never happen in Eye in the Sky. Now, again, the effect of it is negligible. I never even noticed it until somebody pointed it out to me. But when you look at that, that's the craftsmanship is different. Okay, and let's not go better or worse, but it's different. There's a different approach to it. And early on, he was very careful about stuff. And so one of the things I find interesting to think about is sort of the way Dick, as a guy in the 1950s, would have seen the progression of his life and his sort of ideological changes. I think he'd be really surprised, frankly, by where he wound up.
Okay. I just, because my mind's kind of reeling here. I'm having this insight about something in particular, and I don't mean to put you on the spots, but let's talk about the potential of having, okay, how do I put this? Did his drug use also kind of contribute to his experience later? I don't know how to, for those who don't know, the mystical, we'll just say mystical experience.
Sure. In this, okay, so it's very subjective. And ultimately, how you understand Philip K. Dick's quote unquote mystical experiences, which are essentially that in the 1974, he had an experience where he opened the door. He had some dental work done, and he was expecting some pain medication to be delivered. And when it showed up, the delivery woman had a Jesus fish necklace, and the pink beam of light came out of her necklace and went into his third eye and deposited divine knowledge. And as a result of that, Philip K. Dick spent the remaining 8 years of his life trying to figure out what the hell had happened. And my sense is that he was never truly skeptical of the reality of the experience. And so all of that speculation is on what caused it for the most part. There's like one, maybe two passages in the exegesis where he says, you know, I like excitement in my life. I was really stressed out. These could have been psychotic projections. But for the most part, he's accepting as a given the reality of the experience.
What?
And
Okay.
that's,
I mean,
you know,
that's like
okay. Well,
experience of the divine is a very Gnostic idea. You get what I'm saying?
But it also matches up with amphetamine abuse and with amphetamine psychosis. And also, one of the people that we had in the course, luckily, was this guy who we referred to as Dr. Larry Bigman, who's a board certified psychiatrist and met Philip K. Dick in the late 1970s, was a big fan, and was able to tell us, you know, basically all of the symptoms that you look at, from the panic attacks and the agoraphobia and everything like that. It speaks to a kind of bipolar disorder. And amphetamines will amplify a bipolar disorder. And every aspect of Phil Dick's biography matches up with this bipolar disorder perfectly. Now, I also want to say that Philip K. Dick was the guy that clued me into the idea that psychiatry itself is a little bit crazy, right? If you are a doctor, right, on a planet that is poisoning itself, that is starving people, that is infusing all kinds of unneeded suffering into the basic populace of the world, right? If you're in an insane world, which I think we can all agree that we are, and you're going, hey, buddy, sitting across from me in the chair, you've got psychiatric disorder X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to give you these medications. That in itself is a kind of pathological I don't want to say psychopathic behavior, but it basically is like
pathological.
It's pathological. Let's just leave it at that, right? And there's a kind of a lack of awareness there. So don't lock me into this idea that, well, Phil Dick is crazy, so none of this matters, and none of his insights are insightful in any way. It's quite the opposite.
I see that you use some of the insights in the course. I mean, through the slides that you show, you basically are talking about, or actually trying to educate people on, like, okay, for instance, one of my favorite slides is the Christianity in the Christian symbolism in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first off, wait, before we get ahead of ourselves, why don't you, like, for anybody who doesn't know all of the things that you were mentioning before we started, how Phil is almost like not only is he one of the most prolific writers, but he's one of the most adapted as well.
Right. So for people who don't know, even if you've never read a science fiction novel, there's a Philip K. Dick novel, there's a chance that you know his work already and you've seen it. If you've watched, let's see, A Scanner Darkly, Blade Runner, Screamers, Minority Report, Adjustment Bureau, The Man in the High Castle, help me out here, there's more.
Oh, God, Paycheck. Some of the more obscure ones. But then you get also sort of like his ideas being redone as different things.
Right.
And now there's more shows that are like Philip K. Dick's Electric Sheep.
There you go. Yeah.
Different ideas that aren't necessarily adaptations of Philip K. Dick, but it's like a Philip K. Dick headspace with a different director and a different writer every episode and stuff of that nature. Also,
there are a lot of Greta Van Fleets to Philip K. Dick's Led Zeppelin, you know. Absolutely. So one of the things that I think fits in with your basic idea, and I'd love to talk about this. One of the ideas that Dick talks about a lot in his exegesis, which are the notes that he made about his mystical experience, particularly later on, is that he's really not excited about Blade Runner. He sees an early script that apparently just drives him crazy. Then he hears Ridley Scott say he didn't read the book. And
Oh,
that just sends him over the moon. Like, oh my God, imagine you're a science fiction writer. They're basing a movie off of your book, and the director admits, I couldn't read it. I didn't read it. Like, he
so
just
when was
freaked.
Blade Runner 80 or 81?
It's came out in 82, but this is going
Oh,
on in like 80 and 81, right?
okay.
Okay,
But I mean,
so
that's at the same time, like The Shining's coming out, which is like this big adaptation to a novel that was extremely popular and it wasn't paid any attention to by the director. So it was like kind of
that's
a
right.
fad at that time.
That's right. That's right. And in addition, though, it's 80 and it's post Star Wars, post Alien. You've got Ridley Scott working with Harrison Ford on this thing with this Trumbull effects. You know, I mean, that's like the biggest, that had more hype in science fiction than anything we could imagine these days. And so there was a lot of expectation for it. So initially, Dick is really turned off by the adaptation. He eventually warms up to it. Late in his life, in the exegesis, he's saying, I did it. And he's excited because he turned down a novelization of the screenplay, which is what the directors and producers of, I guess the producers of the film wanted him to do. And that would involve taking his book off the market and making it just about what you see in Blade Runner being, I guess, called Blade Runner. They offered him something like, they promised him he could earn something like $400,000, which in our day and age is 1.3 million. And instead, he turned it down. He did not allow that, and he took something like $14,000 or $10,000 as to write the novel tie-in. And he was really, really proud of that. And then he took that time and he wrote The Transmigration of Bishop Timothy Archer. So if we're looking at it in hindsight, he cemented that the last book that he wrote would be this first-person realist novel from a woman's perspective, rather than the corporate shilling of a novelist's tie-in to the movie that's coming out. And one of the things he says is that he's really excited because he knows there's this he's injected this Christian content. Yeah, you've got it right here. That with Vallis's help, he has inserted this Christian content into Blade Runner. And he hasn't seen, all he has seen is the essentially the sizzle reel for the effects team. So some of the ship flying around Tyrell headquarters, all that kind of stuff. There's no way he saw that scene. With the nail going through the hand and the bird in his hand.
Right.
And so that has become kind of something that in the last couple of weeks we just started talking about, and it is fascinating to me. And I would love to know, there is a person who can shed some light on this. It's a guy named Paul Salmon, who I know, who wrote definitive Blade Runner book. And he's got to know how that scene evolved into the movie. And if there's an interesting story there, you know, I mean, for those people who are of the opinion that Philip K. Dick's experiences were spiritually substantial and real, a great piece of evidence of that is there's this insanely Christian imagery in Do Androids and Blade Runner, and it even works metaphorically in a sort of Dickian way, in the idea of like, look, we're all robots until we're saved by Christ. We're all robots until we're like sensitive and aware of the suffering of the world, and we're bound by our own being to address that suffering. That's a big deal in the exegesis. And towards the end of his life, I think 6 months before he died, Dick had this really intense vision of this young child named Tagore, is what he said. Tagore, I was right. Tagore. I've been told it's no, I forget
just
now.
Like King Felix, this is basically the Messiah idea that shows up in his latter books.
Exactly. So yeah, it's the third dispensation. So it's not the Christian dispensation, or I guess the Abrahamic dispensation. It's not the Mohammedan. It's not the Arab, the Islamic dispensation. It's this third one, which is somehow like it seems like late in the exegesis, it's really ecological in nature, which is amazing because in 1982, people were not talking about that kind of stuff. I think Silent Spring had been out, but you know, there wasn't a world ecological awareness the way that's become, you know, front and center today. And so in that regard, like if you're looking for, well, in what ways was Philip K. Dick prescient of as a science fiction writer? Well, he certainly at the end of his life was primarily concerned with the health of the ecology as a single unit, and that human beings are a part of that. And that's, I mean, he might, I'd be interested to know, he might have been, you know, quicker to the table with that than Ursula Le Guin. I'd be interested to know if she had environmental issues earlier than that. She probably did, because she's just so awesome in every way. Anyway, yeah, it's a fascinating
I just want to recap and make sure that I'm basically, I got this correct. So
yeah,
Philip K. Dick had a religious experience where he thought that he was talking to God. He gave that a lot of names like Valis. And then what you're saying is Tagore is like sort of the Messiah sent by the emissary of Valis or God or whatever. But he's also saying that God is basically using him to put Christian messages in his work that he's admitting were unintentional. Right?
It seems to be. And one of the great ironies here is that Dick was super paranoid about being affected by secret messages that were embedded in media.
Right, because there's another version of Valis, like Radio Free Albemuth, where there's a completely different slant on it. It's no longer God we're talking about, but like Russians who are trying to program him and use him as some like Oswaldian assassin.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's interesting in all of it is that even when it's like God or whatever, God works through technology. Right? So God has technological means by which things occur. So in other words, it's like if you think about like a narrative form, like it's not unexplained. Like if we're in Frankenstein, Mary Shelley would say, like, words cannot convey the brilliance of the beam that emanated from the fish necklace to the forehead, right? For Philip K. Dick, he uses technological terms. It was a laser. It was like a laser.
Yeah, he speaks of it in technology. In fact, like if we go back to R. Crumb's representation in Weirdo 16, which really talks about like he's kind of mixing the old world Christian world with the modern world and saying that there's some sort of technology involved between the two civilizations.
Yeah, I mean, he gets into some really weird stuff. You know, the idea is that when your third eye opens, right? So you can see stereoscopically visually because you have two eyes, and that allows a depth of perception. The idea is that your third eye opens, and that allows a kind of depth perception along the linear time axis. And so you can see you have this different perception of time. You know, which is fascinating, you know. And so one of the things that was interesting in this class was like, how seriously do you take the stuff that he wrote in the exegesis? Because on the one hand, it seems like a lot of people said it seems like the notebooks that get left in the coffee houses by the crazy people, quote unquote, right? You know, like you'll have this town eccentric, you know, who's always walking around knitting and writing in a book or something. And then they leave the book in the coffee shop and everybody opens it and it's like, you know, God said, blah, blah, and the, you know, linear time access, and your third eye opens and you're seeing stereoscopically. On the other hand, we had this physicist who was like, you know, look, this is what Phil Dick is talking about. Here's now 40 years later, physicists who are talking about similar things in experimental physics that they're, you know, they come to the same conclusion.
Right. So, I mean, the exegesis basically you can find in any tent dweller's lair.
I mean,
or you can find it in a laboratory as scribblings of some professor, right?
Well, they did it really good in that Coen Brothers movie. What's it called? Serious Man, where this brother is kind of mentally troubled. He has something called the mentaculus, I think. which is a book that has sort of diagrams in it and drawings and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's a trope, you know. Definitely there's a trope of like a kind of the hypergraphia
scribbling on the wall. You go inside and there's like red things or red lines and string going from one picture to the other picture, and completely insane. And but I mean, the exegesis is heavily religious. Like he dove into Gnosticism and started talking about sacred text, or what are they called, apocryphal text. So
yeah, I mean,
I have this fantasy of relevancy up. I mean, what are you exactly trying to say? Like, there's something like, okay, I think it's in what's his name, William James, religious experience. There's this idea he puts forth in there where it's like, you really can't say, like, Joan of Arc having a toothache doesn't reduce the impact that she had on the outside world.
Sure. Well, what I'm getting at here, though, is that, like, if you look at the people the artists that our society venerates, a lot of times there's an aspect of mental illness involved, right? So it's like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Kurt Cobain, you know, you could go on and on. And so in some ways, it's as if it's that the mental illness is like a legitimizing aspect of their creative endeavor. And it makes sense, you know, because if you have any sense of like a post-Freudian psychology, you have a intuition that these crazy people have access to information you don't.
Have you ever heard of Jeffrey Kripal?
Oh yeah, for sure. That Jeffrey Kripal was Eric Davis's thesis advisor at Rice University. He's also one of the footnoters in the exegesis.
Eric Davis. Wait, I know that name because he's the technonosis guy.
Yes,
is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then there's this one. I've got his latest High Weirdness.
Eric Davis. There he is.
Yeah. He's a name to know for sure. Here we go. Look at this. This is High Weirdness. Drugs, Esoterica, and Visionary Experiences in the 70s. And this is Philip K. Dick, Terence McKenna, and Robert Anton Wilson.
Oh, yes. Robert Anton Wilson and Dick Gaggett, even they talked about each other. And in fact, like the first place that I really got the most information that I need, or the enough information to get me really interested in Philip K. Dick, was Robert Anton Wilson's Everything is Under Control book, where he had like little blurbs who he thought was important. And Philip K. Dick was a big deal for him.
Yeah, I think it was, you know, in our probably Generation X's DNA to discover, like, this sort of a young man, the rite of passage for a young man is Robert Anton Wilson, Philip K. Dick, sometimes Clive Barker, you know, but there's that, and then now it's the Chuck Palahniuk in Fight Club, and
it's more postmodern and weird, but. I mean, would you consider Philip K? I mean, definitely his ideas are postmodern. Is he a postmodernist?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was a big thing we got into, and actually have a way better understanding of that now than I used to. So, for sure, he's definitely a postmodernist. But postmodernism is riddled with these kinds of contradictory problems about itself. Like, well, the first problem is, who the fuck calls their literary movement modernism? Right? Like, what is supposed to come after that? Right? Like, oh, I'm going to label mine, you know, today or whatever, you know, like so they set up this sort of cul-de-sac, you know, of like, okay, what's going to come next? And at the same time, the society was changing. So modernism acknowledged the fact that instead of handcrafting things were mass produced. Okay. And so then postmodernism, though, gets to when the main manufacturing, the output is not not objects, but information, and narratives and that kind of thing. So the thing that's important about Phil Dick is that he was working in a television store in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. So essentially, he was at ground zero for people getting their televisions in their home. And at the time, he was a huge champion of this because he's an agoraphobic. He can't go to the opera, but he can watch the opera on TV. And so he's right there. So he's witnessing this sort of, small town. Berkeley, California is like a tiny little small town, white picket fences and that kind of thing. There's a lot of liberalism but it's utopian in Berkeley. But it's very similar to, what you would imagine like, the perfect suburban world in the 1950s. And so anyway, I don't know.
Maybe not. His ideas are definitely postmodernism. Whether he would want that moniker is a different.
Well, I mean, postmodernism gets a lot of shit because, the people talk about its impenetrability or whatever. The way to think about postmodernism is it's an awareness of the forces of market on art. And that is huge in Phil Dick's work. And so, like, if you look at a great book of his, like The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, that's his most postmodern work, in the sense that it's about the transmission of information, the way that information creates a world, the worldview that's inescapable. It's a critique of media culture, and it echoes a lot of the stuff Marshall McLuhan said. That where technology amplifies us, it also amputates us. Right. And so, like, for instance, Palmer Eldritch is this like interstellar billionaire who comes from these other star system. He is able to, through people taking a drug based on his technology, he's able to appear in their dreams and their sort of their hallucinations. But his appearance is limited to his technological manifestations, his three stigmata, which is his metal eye, his metal hand, and his metal teeth. The Easter egg there is that Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch is refilmed in Hollywood as Nightmare on Elm Street. Right, where there's the exact same thing. If you die in the dream, you die in real life. He has the three stigmata is the claw, the hands, the hat, and the sweater, which appear on different people's shit all the time. Yeah, I blew your mind. Awesome. There you go. There it is. That's it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. But they also just optioned the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. Netflix just optioned it quite quietly. So that's going to happen too, probably.
Awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad.
So how do you feel about that, man? Like, where is the line drawn as far as like viewing or interpreting symbolism in pop culture? Like, when is it pareidolia and when is it like because we're talking about artist intention here? When do you kill the author?
Okay, good. I got an answer for you. It doesn't work when it's circular, when it's just spinning in place, when spinning your wheels, right? Good symbolism, I think, is transformative. The symbol of Christianity, of the Christ on the cross, is the ultimate symbol of transformation, right? But it's a really complicated and interesting one. Like, I was thinking about this just the other day, like the idea of being hung on nails, of having of that kind of, it's the ultimate anxiety, right? It's the ultimate anxiety. You're in pain.
Public humiliating, because it's not just death; it's humiliation, then death.
It's the worst. It's like suffering on 11, right? Okay, suffering on 11, and that you. But that there's like
to 11.
and there's a release to that, and the other thing that's crazy in that moment is that Christ himself is like, God, where the hell are you? why have you forsaken me? He's not there holding Christ's hand, right? Saying you're going to be okay. It's like that's the isolation of the Christian himself is like is embodied in that. Slavoj Žižek, the philosopher, likes to say, in that moment, Christ himself is an atheist. It's pretty interesting. But then, right, that the release from that is a psychological transformation of like giving of your becoming Christ-like, giving of yourself, giving some other greater good or not ambition, that's the wrong word, some great aspiration, some great something that you can achieve that's greater than yourself, a call to be larger than we are. That's a really great symbol,
right.
And so that's, you're not, I actually like, in this case, the sort of Mormon approach, which is you don't dwell on the cross and the crucifix. Like that's a symbol that you go, okay, phew, God loves me. God's there for
I'm
me.
glad that's done.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all set.
It's a catharsis.
Particularly in relation to like what it would have been like to be a religious person prior to Christ, right? Like, who is this motherfucker up there who's zapping me with lightning bolts, who's making who's testing me if I'm going to kill my kid, totally irrational, totally anxiety producing, right? Like the worst boss you could have, and so one of my sort of weird takes is like Christianity is just a kind of anti-anxiety drug of like, okay, you're nervous, you don't know what
God, for the masses, right?
Yeah. Well, but I mean, it's better than that because it's transformative. It's transformative.
It's more substance.
You say opium is transformative too, but it's a positive transformation, right? It's for deal.
You're muted. Hold on a sec. You're muted. You're muted. Yeah, you're. If you look down on your little thing, there's like I think it was just there you go.
I'm back. I think, unfortunately, I have a tiny mini fridge that's on the circuit, and I think it just tripped the whole thing. Sorry, can you remind me where I just was? That was
cathartic Christianity.
Right. Yes. Okay, so what Eric Davis says is that Christianity is awesome when it's the underdog. Right. But when Christianity gets on top and it's in charge, it sucks. Right. And so
that brings, you can't have the Dark Ages without Catholicism.
Well, I mean, we may very well find out what happens when Christianity gets in charge. You know what I mean? Like it's headed in that direction. And it's already in charge in a lot of different ways to begin with anyway. But the idea is that if you really take in the ideas and the body and blood of Christ, then you go out and you help the suffering and you give your money away, and that's a transformative act that is really, really positive. And so I'm all for that. I'm all for art that does that, and that's what it's done for me. Like when I was a jerk and I was really selfish and self-involved as a 20-year-old, and at the same time, like really, riddled with doubt and low self-esteem, and just really in a kind of misery, was T.S. Eliot being presented in this college classroom by this professor, like, hey, what have you given of yourself? How have you made yourself vulnerable? And that transformation is continuing on. It's like, it's 20 years later, almost 30 years later, and I'm still transforming in that way. That's still my guiding post. That's still like, okay, how much have you given? How much have you made yourself vulnerable? How much have you, really opened yourself up and tried to be real about shit? That's great. And so, but there's a lot of people who are will never step away from the cork board with all of the strings going every which direction. And those people are not out there helping the poor, and they're not out there making the world a better place. They're just kind of masturbating their paranoia. and placing themselves in this central role of significance that, you know, in my experience is doesn't help, doesn't make you a better person, doesn't make you more likable to the people around you or any of that kind of shit.
I mean, I guess like we're talking about the hierarchy of priorities or whatever, you know, like, but okay. So I want to mention ET because if I remember correctly, ET came out at the exact same time as Blade Runner.
That's right. I believe either, I'm not sure exactly the same, but a week or two either way. And
so they were competitors, basically.
They were competitors, and there was 1 week where the box offices rivaled one another, and then the bad reviews came out for Blade Runner, and the good reviews came out for ET, and it soared. And what's interesting is that the disdain for Blade Runner was universal. It's like you can't find a Roger Ebert review where he really likes the early on. I mean, nobody was a fan of it. And that's in part because it was released in a form that we don't see very often today, with these weird voiceovers and a sort of different ending. And that's a whole other complicated story in and of itself. But it is interesting that America chose E.T., which is a feel-good movie that that ultimately tells us the other is essentially like us. You know, like, okay, this alien is
totally Blade Runner does the same thing in like a darker, shadowy way.
And there's a way in which you like, okay, I would say that you basically understand the character of E.T., the little guy. You get him down to you understand him fully as a viewer. There's a way in which you do not understand the robots in Blade Runner. They resist that understanding, and people didn't want anything to do with that. You know what
I mean? It's true other. It's not like fuzzy other.
because the other that the other represents within us is not a warm, fuzzy thing that we understand. It's a fundamental veil of what we can understand and of what we that yet exists and drives people to do dark shit, you know. And so, like, the fact that people would rather imagine the other, the inside of them, is like, oh, it's a little alien and all it wants to do is love and eat Skittles or whatever it is, you know.
Well, I mean, the Christian symbolism in ET is obvious just off the movie poster.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, this is man. Well, but so ET's a god?
Yeah. I mean, he basically is Jesus. He comes back to life. He has this little glowing.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I get that for sure.
And that's the Sistine Chapel, which is
which is man and God touching. So fundamentally, you've got essentially two. Because that was one of the questions I was asking. Where's the Christian symbolism in the other science fiction movies of the time? Well, we should have just looked at. You're right. It's all over E.T.
E.T.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But what else? Where are the other ones though? Are there some other?
Oh, I don't know. This is a great premise to explore.
I would be very interested in knowing what kind of like Christian symbolism in science fiction movies, because on the one hand,
it's also before movies. I mean, you have John Carter as far as Burroughs. Tarzan is kind of Christian symbolism, but those are intentional. I mean, both characters are named JC and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's funny is, you know, that image of Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner with the bird in his hand and the nail through his. Like I don't think it was actually even in the movie. I think it was a production shot maybe, but there's this really famous picture of it where he's just holding the two like this. And I use that as my profile picture. I'm going to date myself now on MySpace. Okay. And I can remember being in a Philip K. Dick fan group on MySpace and having people say, there's no way Ridley Scott would put Christian imagery in his science fiction movie. And their basic idea was like, it's science fiction. It can't be religious at all. And it's that,
wait. I mean, this is post, I guess it's not necessarily post the understanding of the hero's journey, but it's definitely post Star Wars.
Well, the person was clueless, you know, for sure. But they're not alone. Like, there's a whole bunch of people who say, essentially like, remember, if you read Isaac Asimov, instead of saying like God, they say galaxy. You know, oh my galaxy, this food is delicious or whatever. You know, like that kind of like that sort of allergy to religion. There's a lot of people who love science fiction who have that. And so they just won't see that imagery in this stuff because it's technological. It has nothing to do with religion. And that's just fascinating to me.
Okay, well, okay, we can definitely, okay. I think that I think it's a good place to start talking about the 1977, what's it called? The Mets speech.
Oh, geez. Okay. All right.
Oh, you're like, oh, geez. I think,
That's
part of me feels like Phil felt the same way about that speech after he made it. You know what I mean? Like, did he regret that, do you think?
Well, there's all kinds of extenuating circumstances. My understanding is that, well, first of all, Philip K. Dick never left the United States except to go to Mets.
Agoraphobia, right? Is that
well, yeah, and he's not a traveler. You know, he and his wife Cleo did road trips across the United States, but he'd never really been anywhere. He had I don't think he'd ever been a guest of honor at a science fiction convention before. Anyway, it was a big deal for him to go there. When he got there, they told him his speech needed to be shorter than he was told.
Oh my God, it is pretty long, especially with the translation.
Exactly.
Everything that he says was repeated.
And so my understanding is that he made cuts that then the translator didn't have. And so the people who were bilingual in the room were saying, what he's saying is not what the translator is saying. I keep thinking of that scene in the Bill Murray, Scarlett Johansson movie where he's in Tokyo, and it's a Sofia Coppola
interpretation.
No, God, how can I?
I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, there's a scene where Bill Murray is talking, and there's a director who's giving him direction in Japanese, and then for like a minute, and then the translator just says 2 or 3 words. Try holding like this. It's going to tell us it's
lost in translation.
Lost in translation, man. Talk about symbolism and all that kind of stuff.
Well, anyway. I mean, have you ever seen like Room 237 where all kinds of individuals?
Yeah. And I actually just watched The Shining with my kids the other night, and I was thinking about that. Okay, back to the Met speech. Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on there. I don't know if Phil Dick is sort of trolling his audience, like being kind of especially far out, like a kind of, Well,
it's interesting. There's confused faces if you watch the speech.
Oh, for sure.
I'm kind of puzzled on if that was because of the wanky translation now, or if the audience was like truly just awed, like what the hell is happening. Well, could you give a brief description on exactly what he said or what is classically?
No, I can't give a brief description of what he said, but
it's funny. I just realized it was mentioned. Oh, it was actually quoted and the newest Joe Rogan. They were talking about simulation theory.
Oh, is that okay? I got to watch that. Yeah. And they talk about this speech?
Well, yeah, he doesn't necessarily mention the speech, but he quotes the speech because to set up simulation theory, he talks about how we're in a simulation and every time they change things, we experience it as deja vu, he says, which everybody would understand as like the Matrix.
Yeah.
But basically, the focus on Joe Rogan was his influence on simulation theory, or outside of this is the part of Philip K. Dick that is more laboratory notebook and less tent well.
Yeah, I got to watch that. That's interesting to me. I have a limited interest in the simulation theory stuff, just because I figure it's kind of a tautology, of like a simulation of what. And so you get into this sort of like endless.
Well, I mean, if you think of it as in a Christian slant, if God says that he created the solar system and he controls everything. We're living, and then at the end, it's Judgment Day, and everybody gets an extra life. I mean, it means that a lot of the things that we're concerned with is vanity, in the same way as a simulation would be vanity, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense that there's two ways to read it. One is we're absolutely in a simulation, in the sense that we are experiencing the simulated information attained by the sense patches of our nervous system, right? That it's recapitulated in our brain. But if you have
that was a good way of putting it.
If you have like a nail in your head, you know, that will affect your perception. So it's it is a simulation, in the sense that, okay, you put a nail in your head, it changes the way you're understanding reality, but it doesn't change reality. Okay, so there's that simulation. Then there's the simulation of like I can see the sort of simulation of a lifestyle being suggested to my kids. You know, it's like you'll be athletic in high school, and you'll be successful with the opposite sex or the same sex, and you'll whatever it is, and you'll aspire to this, and you'll struggle in this way, and it's like a kind of a digested narrative tract that pretty much everybody gets, and it's a simulation. It's something that's been worked out. It's a trail that's been worked out by the people who walked the same way before you.
I'm thinking of the Kurosawa film. I can't remember. It's Rodon or something. They call it even the Rodon effect. There's like an effect named after it. But where, like, if there was an event or a crime that happened, that everybody in the crime, we're talking about that, like Robert Anton Wilson again, like quantum psychology, the fact that you could have multiple people in a room, and if they describe the room, it's completely different rooms to each individual. That everybody walks around sort of like in their generated simulation that doesn't really touch the other simulations.
Yeah, and I mean, it's become more prevalent because now people are sort of weaned on a particular ideological set of facts, you know, so such that if you listen to right-wing radio, you understand, like, Let's Go Brandon, right, in a way that people who don't listen to right-wing radio, they don't understand what that means. Or you know, like my mom watches MSNBC all day, and like her way of viewing the world is absolutely a product of just that narrative goop being just shoved in her skull, all day, that says, the leaders are thoughtful, the leaders have our best interests at heart, they ultimately, are struggling against the forces of evil to, present what they can for us, Oh, I'm sure there's Easter eggs in Lost in Translation, man.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, like, right there, the whole idea, because Scarlett Johansson, for some reason, when I saw this picture, I immediately thought of her movie Lucy, where it's talking about like the evolution of the species. I don't know. There's
probably her. Don't forget her, which is getting all this talk because that's the AI's.
That's very K. Dickian, but oh yes. I mean, in a way, you could even say her name, Scarlet. She's kind of like the Scarlet Woman in this sort of like Christian. If we really do an overhaul of symbolism.
Sure, yeah. And again, like I'm all for that if the goal is a kind of personal transformation, or a kind of like, I guess it's a kind of like
we're going back to Valis again here, but the question is, like, you once you said a comment to me one time, because I asked you which one was darker, or we were talking about which one was darker, whether it be Radio Free Albemuth or Valis, and you said Valis was darker psychologically.
That's probably right, but I haven't read Radio Free Albemuth in quite a long time, so you maybe don't want to quote.
But you think that that's a dark spot where he winds up and he's seeing messages in media where he's like, "Oh, I can see God talking to me in King Super commercials," Oh, I got him.
I think that's a dark spot, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, like, I think of the movie Chapter 27. where I don't know if that's true where Mark David Chapman is, but as a shooter, Mark David Chapman is putting all of these random association or Easter eggs, shall we call them Easter eggs,
Right.
together, where he's talking about, hey, this is where Rosemary's Baby is, and you know what I'm talking about. He's going through all, and everybody looks at him like they're not really sure where he's going with that, but that kind of like helps him make up his mind on killing Lennon.
Okay.
So I know that there's like, I mean, if you read shooter manifestos, there's some weird connections.
Well, the Jared Loughner,
where do you draw the line?
Jared Loughner, the guy that shot up Giffords, I think he was a big Phil Dick fan, as a matter of fact.
Oh, interesting. Because a lot of people have taken that one particularly and have drawn all kinds of like links. I remember one guy making all kinds of connections to like the Planet of the Apes movie. But when you were reading his blog post, you were like, this is total Philip K. Dick exegesis.
Yeah. I mean, the human brain is really well focused to make connections. That's what intelligence is, in a lot of ways. And so it seems natural when it's productive, and when it's unproductive that's a tough line.
Is that your metric then?
Productivity,
or catharsis, at least some sort of personal growth.
Well, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I had this big insight into The Shining, and I don't think it really leads. Well, maybe it's personal growth, but I don't know. I think you can just.
Oh no, you can't say that and not explain.
Oh, all right. Yeah, it's a good one. So this is when he's this is his encounter with the woman in the room 237. And how she shows up in the bathtub, and she's absolutely beautiful, and she gets out of the bathtub and walks up to him, and he's clearly lusting after her, and she reciprocates. And the minute that he begins to kiss her, she begins to age and putrefy. And it's Jack's, the main character's great fear. Like he believes that his life has been destroyed by this horrible woman that he's married to. He calls her a sperm bank. And so it's it's the ultimate fear, is like you lust after this woman, you fall in love with them, you get with them, you marry them, and they just drag you to the grave. They are decay and putrefaction personified, and they taunt you as you sink into the black mire of time and death. It's great. It's fucking awesome, and that's his huge fear. And the crazy thing about that character is he's been emasculated. He's forced to care for a hotel. He is forced to serve as a kind of mother figure. He can't go out there and build something and make a new tower or whatever. He has to take care of this thing. And so his
symbolized by him having to go down to the boiler room every day. And if he doesn't,
right. But then
he's like a slave to it.
He compensates for that by having this creative drive, right? Which is stunted by his immaturity. And so the creative output of the creative drive is blah, blah, all work and no play make Jack a dull boy. So I get.
Where's the line then? I mean, because if you watch Room 237, there's no doubt that some people's interpretations are not healthy.
That's right. That's right. There are some there. I agree. Okay. That's really well put. My guess is that here's, I guess, the bottom line is what I'm going to say. And who knows? And I have no qualification to say this other than I've hung out with some weird people in my life.
You've talked a lot about consciousness with a lot of people who have a lot of different credentials.
Okay. So. Speculation is the human project, right? And healthy minds will speculate relatively healthy. And I think unhealthy speculation is sort of just a kind of symptom of an unhealthy mind. There's something else going on, whether it's like drug abuse or egocentrism. I think a lot of this conspiracy theory stuff is just egocentrism, because you're the one that knows, no one else knows. One of the things we did look at it in the biography of Phil Dick is that he was a self-aggrandizer. He always was kind of making a big deal out of himself, and he told a lot of lies in support of like this sort of false salesmanship about who he was. He talked about going to the stacks of the UC Berkeley and reading the secret journals of the Nazi officers. He never did that. He talks about, you know, basing these complicated plots off of the work that was being done at the French department of Tokyo University. That's just made up, you know.
He said himself, you know, like never trust a writer.
Right. He's a bullshitter. He's a bullshitter.
Right. His bread and butter was bullshitting. So,
but the bullshit, but okay. So then in the height of his amphetamine abuse, he's absolutely paranoid. The FBI are coming for him.
Yes.
The men in black.
Well, I mean, there's some events that make him paranoia.
Well, so if we want to talk about the break-in,
sure. Let's talk about the break-in.
Okay. So in 1970, I believe, October of 1970, Philip K. Dick has this safe that's blown open and blown open. That's what it says, blown open. And there's plastic explosive used, and there's scorch marks on the wall, and this huge safe is blown open. Okay. And Rolling Stone, Paul Williams writes a big article centering on Phil Dick's.
You're not going to tell me it never happened.
No, crazy theories. Okay, well, we had Peter Fitting on, who was a literary critic and a friend of Phil Dick, and he was at that house after it was break-in, and he goes, it was a file cabinet and it had been jimmied open.
That's it. No explosive. No.
There was absolutely no explosives. It was pried open. It was a complicated filing cabinet. It was a fireproof filing cabinet.
It was a safe where he was locking down some of his manuscripts.
He was.
I guess maybe even whatever the precursor to the exegesis, whatever notes.
That's right. He did keep notes like that. He kept manuscripts in there. He also kept drugs in there. It's not in any of the biographies, but I'm convinced.
And he was selling at the time.
He was dealing drugs. He was dealing because if you look at that period in his life, he's not making almost no money from fiction. It's one of the things I've got to kind of try to figure out is if there's enough money there, but I just can't believe it. And he has all these kids at his house all the time. And what Paul Williams says is, yeah, maybe you can buy some speed from him. Maybe you can get some speed from him if you listen to his stories. Ray Nelson says Ray Nelson is another science fiction writer, friend of Phil Dick's, wrote They Live, right? The story that They Live is based on.
Oh, yeah. Highly paranoid movie. That's like
highly paranoid movie that gets to some real truths.
Third eye weirdness symbolism. Yeah.
He said that Phil Dick was absolutely dealing drugs, and that what happened. Ray Nelson says what happened is this girl, Donna, who's in Scanner Darkly, essentially a kind of love interest friend of Phil Dick's, who's not only involved in drug dealing at a really high level, but is also probably an informant for the police and is probably a user and an addict, that she talked Phil into getting a really big advance of drugs and then knew when it was in the safe, broke it open and stole it. But
yeah,
Phil,
that's plausible because that's like a real common thing to happen. You bring somebody over to your house, they watch where you put your weed. The next thing you know, they're going for that weed.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense. And the crazy thing about it, though, is that Phil was really talked about it endlessly. I think he knew what happened, and yet he talked about like not knowing what happened, and
because it generated ideas. Like I know, like I mean, you could see there's a lot of Scanner Darkly in that whole scenario.
Absolutely. For sure. And yeah, so it's productive, but it's also weird because it's like if he knows what happened, why is he lying about it? And even weirder, on the anniversary of the break-in, he would get really weird and like lock shit up and like be worried that something else was going to happen. So,
like some timed ritual or something.
Yeah, and in fact, like one of the last really powerful visions he had was on something like the 10th anniversary of the break-in. And this is all stuff, honestly, this is all stuff we uncovered working together in the class, because we talked a lot about the break-in and we established the date. And then Gabriel McKee, who's a scholar and has worked on a lot of Philip K. Dick's religious interests, he mentioned this other vision, and we noticed, oh, it's November 11th or whatever. It's like the same freaking thing. So there's
11/11. Wait, that is 11/11, right? Like
I don't think that date is right, but it's November something. It's November 1970 and then November 1980, I believe, are these two.
Well, if it's 11/11, that's just weird. That's like,
well, I don't think it is. But again, if it were, think about that. If it were, it's possible that it's just simply a different date. You know what I mean? Like, and yet at the same time, it's like, wow, 11/11, that's got, so there's a way in which we bring all of these expectations for speculation, like fodder for speculation, to every every intellectual endeavor that we do. And that's why science is so careful to structure experiments that cut this shit out, so you don't get bad info.
Well, I mean, okay, so before we get into talking about and finishing up talking about your class, I want to ask, like, the concept of an Easter egg. I mean, Philip K. Dick put Easter eggs inside of his books, sort of like, Valis talks about Scanner Darkly. And if you go and read Scanner Darkly, there's a little bit more information about Valis that he didn't put in Valis. But he's not necessarily like creating universes in the same way that where everything interlocks, where sort of like, Charles Dickens or Stephen King has done, where they all of their stories exist in the same universe.
Yeah.
So, some of K. Dick's, I mean, it was obvious he was just making it up as he went. But people have put Easter eggs inside of his movies, sort of like referencing things that aren't in the actual source material as some nod, I guess you could call it, or homage to K. Dick's story. But now Easter eggs are a big thing. For instance, give it 5-10 more years, but all of Star Wars won't even have original dialogue. It will just be dialogue that's thrown back to other things. But are Easter eggs, the whole idea of them, a good thing or a bad thing for fiction, in your opinion?
Well, what's the Marxist critique, right? The Marxist critique of Easter eggs is that they're essentially like a tool of capitalist suppression. They're the opiate of the masses, right? That if you can, it's like a hit, like, oof, I found that
nostalgic.
Snort. Or I think it's an ego thing of like, ooh, I got it.
I know what that is.
I'm smart. I get I see the connection.
I am the true fan. I am the fan.
I see the connections other people don't is a hell of a drug. You know what I mean?
Wow, that's the whole premise of this channel, my friend.
Well, I mean, then, yeah, exactly. So you're pretty far down the rabbit hole. Which it's
I sell dopamine, man.
where does rabbit hole come from, right? Well, Alice goes down the I mean, I get it. I think,
but I mean, that's what you're doing. Your mythology, the methodology of your courses, our literary investigation will consist of 3 basic activities: a close reading that examines the style, symbolism, literary allusions. I mean, we're talking about Easter eggs, and overarching thematic concerns of Dick's writing in an attempt to articulate its meaning. I mean, that's like what's at the center of that Easter egg. We're going to pick it apart. A survey of the literary and historical context of Dick's writing in an attempt to determine his influences and to place his work and thinking within a larger historical and cultural frame. I mean, we've talked a lot about that today. His influences go into the Matrix and all kinds of things that he didn't write or didn't intend, and an examination of Dick's life and its relation to his work. I mean, like, you're hunting for Easter eggs to an extent.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you want to cast it that way, for sure.
Let me have it.
Yeah. I'll let you have it. I guess the way I'd put it is, my 85-year-old mother is down in the front yard planting flowers, and so she's churning over the dirt and pulling out the weeds and putting in the seeds. And I'm not, who am I to say, hey, you don't do that, do something else, like,
Well, yeah.
I think
I mean,
probably
you can
looking,
show your concern, and you have, but you've been very polite about it.
well, I think looking for Easter eggs is as good an activity as any other. Whether it's
As long
making
as it's used for personal growth or something like.
well, I mean, if you just enjoy it, do you get personal growth from flying around model airplanes? I don't know, probably
Well,
not.
well, how would you describe the importance of your class to an individual who's interested?
Well, okay, so it's the same thing. It's like, it's
Because there's a
just,
bunch of different kind of people in there. There's
yeah,
scholars
there
that are
are.
in.
That's very true. So I would say the reason for taking the class differed from person to person, but overall, what I was trying to do was inform our opinions about Phil's life and art with like as much information and context as I could squeeze in there. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're kind of like, you are hunting for Easter eggs. It's like the Easter egg of, oh wow, that
That's what that
vision was on
means.
the 10th anniversary of the break-in. It is at the heart
Amazing.
of, I guess, a lot of the humanities. I mean, if you go to a history class, they're gonna be looking at the continuities and recapitulations. And again, I think that it has more to do with just the general health of the mind.
Hmm.
If the mind is, such that, like, look, if creating an Easter, if hunting for Easter eggs and talking about that leads you to create a YouTube channel that creates a community where you're now like,
Celebrating.
doing things out in the universe, that's awesome. Like, that's what's great about being into Dungeons and Dragons, or
Right.
or
Well, of course, that has been like you have like Maze and Monsters of the whole
well,
idea. That was
they
what I
got that.
think.
But in being into lowriders, or being into basketball or skateboarding, like a
Right.
community that you build around yourself, that's awesome. If it's like, I think they're out to get me, I think that I'm having obsessive thoughts about being persecuted personally, that people are after me. That's I don't think I think that's the symptom of something else that's going on, some other need that's not being met, or some kind of like out of control, out of balance, but
Right.
it's a,
Manic.
yeah, that's
Don't be a shooter.
yeah. I mean, but it's more complicated than that. It's, don't be a shooter, but recognize that a society that's focused on status quo is going to demonize people who think differently. And so, like, don't when somebody says, oh my God, what a monster, don't
The
jump.
other.
Don't jump to the conclusion that person's a monster, because let's remember that there's a monster in just the setup,
Right.
and just in the world of the person who's telling you there's a monster. There's ecological destruction, economic inequality, any manner of suffering, right? And if they're on this tip about, this, that, or the other thing that they're ticked off about, there's already insanity in the whole thing, and so that's I think the freeing thing of Phil Dick's ideas is like, there's the conformity, the artificial constraints of society are detrimental. And when you recognize those, and the kind of the scales fall from your eyes, and you recognize, oh my God, I feel this way because my dad imparted this emphasis on material wealth when I was a kid, or whatever.
Yeah.
Then I'm not sure you can have a transformation without an Easter egg.
Right.
You know,
I mean, what you said earlier, kind of like we were talking about the catharsis of Jesus on the cross, but his Father, why are you forsaking me is an Easter egg. You're like, oh, wait a minute. What exactly does that mean?
yeah,
And there's this whole like unpacking of theological ideas, but you can get that out of a movie. Most
yeah,
people do. I
yeah.
mean, you've had that experience, right? Where you come out of a movie and you feel like you can take on the world. You're like, holy crap, that the things are different now. The sun looks different now, like, but
I haven't had that.
what are your
I haven't
plans?
had
What
that
are your
experience.
plans?
I
Go
haven't had
ahead.
that.
Say what you,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no. Please go ahead and say what you were going to say.
I was gonna say I haven't had that experience in a long time. I've enjoyed
Well,
movies quite
sure.
a bit, but I'm not sure I've been transformed by them in a while. But I'm not,
Everybody's had that. You usually have that
yeah,
experience
it
when
happened
you're
when I
a
was a kid.
kid.
I mean,
And
I'm 52 now. I'm sort of set in my ways, I guess. It's a kind of interesting way to think about it. I'm
what's
not
your plans, young man? What are you planning? Are you going to have more classes? Is this done?
Oh yeah, this class is almost done. We were waiting to hear from Tim Powers, but he had a sort of set of unforeseen circumstances arise, and he's been having to
AWOL?
attend to those. So where it's a weird Phil Dickian thing where the kind of ending is just sort of a fizzling out rather than a wrapping up in great summation.
Wow. Yeah.
What will happen is that the course will ultimately be made available through the university that offered it, which is called Morbid Anatomy, which is I would encourage everybody listening to go check out. It's a collection. It's an online university for just a wide variety of ideas and sort of marginalized stuff that doesn't get talked about. And it's awesome. So the class will eventually be available there. More classes there. I'm working on a symbolism class, but it looks like it may be delayed until the fall. But I'd like to do some more Phil Dick stuff. We only did 12 or 14 of the 44 novels or whatever. So there's plenty of literature to look for Easter eggs in. And I've worked on a Philip K. Dick biography off and on for about a year, and I probably will continue that. And I have some other ideas to pursue, other writing about Phil Dick to pursue. So I remain undaunted, a dickhead. I do, after 16 weeks and 2,500 pages, I do want to take a little break. I do want to read something that's not science fiction and just whatever, just distract my mind for a little while. But you know how that goes, right? The minute you start going into something else, you're like, oh, there's an Easter egg that pulls me right back to Phil Dick. Yes. And that, I guess, is maybe an interesting way to end this, but I have spent so much time and effort and thinking on Phil Dick that it's kind of like the way I see the world. It's kind of like I understand time through his, what was happening in 1977? Well, Phil Dick was going to Metz, and what would Phil Dick do in this situation? Or this reminds me of the situation when Phil Dick turned down $400,000 to write a novelization of the. And
you've become a character in one of his stories.
But I mean, but then again, I talk to other people, and everybody's life is infused with what they're interested in,
Right.
and so it speaks
to what we think, sort of.
Yeah, it speaks to the importance of quality nutrition. It don't you gotta watch good movies, you gotta read good books, you gotta be encountering great art, because it's so integral to who you are as a human being and what you do, that it's just like food. If you just eat garbage all day,
have a balanced diet of what you consume as far as pop culture.
You can't eat too much, you can't eat too little. There's an appetite that is natural.
Consume things that are good for you, sort of like.
Well, but that's tricky.
Not just porn. No.
Well, but I mean, but you go to the store, right, and it says organic on, and you're like, oh, it's organic, right? I'll get it. That's good. And then you go, and then you realize, wait a minute, what is the standard for putting organic on the box? Well, you know what I mean? So it is, that's the challenge, and that is the fake reality,
Yeah.
right? It's like that, you know, that you might go to the store and it says like, hey, this builds your bones, like this whatever it is. You might see an ad for like a crazy potion at late night and it says it helps your bones. And in fact eats away when you drink it eats away at your bones. That's the fake reality we live in, you know, or like,
Right.
it's the Coca-Cola has sodium in it so that the more you drink, the thirstier you get, you know, and you go, my God, I'm thirsty. You know, geez, I don't know what's with me today. I'm so thirsty. When the trigger, when the hunger is internalized, you don't know, right? Like, why am I suddenly craving, like, why when I go to the store do I want to buy this brand rather than this brand?
What commercial did that?
And I don't know about you, but I've spent some time like sort of just reflecting on my feelings in the store, and it's wild. It's like, okay, Pepperidge Farm is one feeling, and these cookies over here are a total different feeling. And like, I don't know if you know, it's like that you go to you go to France.
You have like a good, like I use this word too much, but like a gestalt about certain things give you I mean, that's what like an Easter egg does. Oh, that I know that's grandmother's house or whatever,
right.
you know.
That's right. Exactly. It's, what is it? It's a chiasmus where it's a synecdoche where you say like you refer to one quality of an object as the whole thing. Like if you refer to champagne as bubbly, or you say you're playing the piano, you're tickling the ivories. Those are synecdoches, which are single aspects of a thing that encapsulate it entirely.
Right. It's like a brand for yeah, I get what you're saying. That's wonderful. Like,
yeah, like if you go to
a lot of like the America's classically known for its colloquialisms like that, but they're things that people say that are almost like puns or something like that, you know, like that hidden, like you only know it if you're familiar with it. But I mean, okay, for like, correct me if I'm wrong, let me get this correct, but you're you teach literature. You're a professor of literature?
Well, it's complicated. I have a master's degree, not a PhD.
Okay.
For a number of reasons. But yeah, and I am technically what's considered an adjunct lecturer at San Francisco State University, which means I don't have tenure or anything like that. But if you're still imagining that there are things like tenure, you haven't been paying attention to higher education the last 10 years. It's really been gutted and sort of, you know, if you imagine like, you know, a mom and pop restaurant being turned into a McDonald's, that's essentially what's happened at the university level. And it's
so be as like the literature of Philip K. Dick has that style to it. Like you kind of like the Philip K. Dick kind of becomes like your friend, and well, he's not describing like these although he's kind of one of the sources for like the cyberpunk idea, or that I guess not steampunk, but that you get what I'm saying. There's a word for it, right?
Well, cyberpunk, that was a big debate in the class, is whether Phil Dick was a sort of proto cyberpunk.
Would you consider Blade Runner the movie as cyberpunk?
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great one. But
if you read his novels, that's not what it's like. Like, it doesn't describe that. It basically says stuff like, "Oh, he walked over and got in a fly car."
Yeah,
and even
or whatever. Yeah,
right. And he'll have like a name for it, but you know what he's talking about is like some space age taxi that he doesn't go into detail about. Yeah. But there's like this literary like trick to his writing that I wonder, like, if you could elaborate on what it means to you. Because like there's certain times where I'm reading Philip K. Dick's work and I'm thinking, that's how you, like, it's in particular, like Valis, when he even if you know it's coming, when he basically lets in on you, you know, hey, the guy I'm talking about is actually me, and I've just separated myself from this storytelling to have a little objectivity to this process. And I almost get like chill bumps when I read it, because even if you know that it's coming, it's like shocking. And then you think like, oh, that's how you do that. Like as a writer, it taught me how to have like a voice and stuff, because there's this weird way that he encapsulates the scene where you know exactly what he's talking about, but he's not using very many words.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think he wasn't a big describer. And he was, if you read Gather Yourselves Together, which is a mainstream novel he may have worked on for as long as a year or two when he was a really young guy. First thing he ever wrote. There are passages of description that are 4 pages long that are just, they're like, it's hard rowing. You just want to give up, you know? So he learned a kind of parsimony. He learned a kind of quick style. He never describes, or later in his fiction, never really describes physical object like landscapes. You know, there's no Victorian description of the way the cliffs look on the other side of the bay or whatever. He got much better with dialogue by the end of his life. I think he was really one of the best American writers with dialogue. I think A Scanner Darkly and Valis have some of the best dialogue that's ever been written in English, in American, we should say. I think Dick's genius was his internal monologues, which he got from James Joyce and Virginia Woolf and those modernists. And the idea of how does the individual mind work? What kind of connections does it draw? One of the things you've already mentioned is that he uses a lot of Easter eggs. You know, he'll mention Toynbee's History, for instance, is a book that gets mentioned in 2 or 3 other books, or
Toynbee time.
You know, references to Desjardins or other you know, famous philosophers, or the quoting of an opera or something like that. You know, he does a lot of that sort of stuff. There, do Toynbee, it's like something like Toynbee History when you get
Toynbee in the movie 2001 Resurrect the Dead on Planet Jupiter. But you've never seen this?
No.
So there's a lot of speculation on who did it, like, but a bunch of these tiles that are sort of like this weird process of like somehow creating artwork through asphalt. Like they put this thing on the asphalt and it kind of sets to where you can't get it up. Wow. And nobody really know, but it just talks about Toynbee. But it has this
they're putting these weird things together. Well, I think that
it's like an Easter egg. Like he's basically talking about how Toynbee topics are in Kubrick's Space Odyssey. There's just all these different theories and what it means. But Toynbee is probably a weird Easter egg that has influenced a lot of different people, like but not very many individuals know, or the actual source that you're talking about.
Well, like one Easter egg would be in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. There's a lot of description of the Edvard Munch painting, The Scream. And there's another one that's I think the drawing is called The Teenager or something like that. But those are clearly works of art that Dick is referencing, you know, in a really interesting way. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Which the funny thing about The Scream is I assign a What is Art essay in my writing class, and in these last 2 semesters, the guarantee that it was an AI essay was that if the example was The Scream, because that was the only example that the AI would throw out for what is art. You have to ask it for a different one, and otherwise it'll give you The Scream.
All right, man. I guess we should wrap up. I am very, very appreciative of the time you spent with us. Like I said, trying to find a way to somehow introduce people who didn't know about Philip K. Dick. And I thought that your class is kind of doing the same thing. I feel like there's a big generation of more interest into Philip K. Dick for a new generation who didn't know who he was.
It's coming around again. It ebbs and flows. And for the last maybe 4 or 5 years, it's really been on an ebb. And it's coming now, and I think because there's a couple of adaptations in the pipeline.
Mm.
One
Well,
of
like we
which,
said, there's series popping off for the last few years all
that's
over
right,
the
the
place.
series popping off. Well, what they've got now is Charlize Theron is working on a series about an alternate world where Phil's twin sister didn't die, and she's alive. And she's there to get her brother out of
That's
trouble.
loaded.
That
Especially Charlize. Like, I got some Easter eggs on her, my fella. Like,
well,
like
the
that's
director
loaded.
is Alfonso Cuarón, the Children of Men guy. So
Oh yeah, well,
that could be
yeah.
amazing. And I think there's a couple adaptations. There's an adaptation of a couple short stories that have been talked about. So yeah, he's coming back, and there's a lot of material there. And as everybody gets more isolated in their own realities and unable to really communicate with other people because they just have different facts and different perspectives, the dick work gets more and more prescient and more relevant, because some of what he's interested in is like, well, how do you get past that? You know, how do you
I
break?
always thought it was amazing, like, even outside of him probably being a prophet and predicting certain things in his stories, whether or not you believe that, there's an argument for it.
For
But
sure.
also, like, the way that we were talking about the Christian symbolism between Blade Runner and E.T. and those being out at the same time. But we also have, like, the fact that sometimes the series, like Man in the High Castle, kind of symbolically represent what the nation is actually going through at the time that it happens.
Yeah.
I think about they had the advertisement campaign where they turned all of the buses into Nazis. And then shortly right after, you have the whole, like, the Trump comparison to fascism and Nazi. It's just, there's weird parallels, as if he's talking about some sort of multiverses that bleed through in current events. It's weird.
Yeah, but it's really important to note that the main difference between The Man in the High Castle, the book, and The Man in the High Castle, the series, is that in the series, there's a real active resistance against fascism. In the book, it's a sort of acquiescence to the fascism. And there's no way you can pitch, hey, yeah, it's not that America becomes fascist in that depiction. It's that America fights the fascism that's imposed on it, which is interesting in a lot of ways. But the main point of the book was that there's fascism everywhere. It's not that big a jump when the fascists come and control us.
When you're in your backyard.
Yeah, they're exactly. And it's an element that's already existent in the American psyche and the human psyche, all that kind of stuff. So
it's the household stranger again.
Yeah, but I mean, but the thing is, like, the Amazon series kind of like pumped us up as fascist fighters, but really what the last 6 years of history show us is no. We're the passive acquiescence to fascism. I mean, it's happening all around us, right?
That's deep, man. That's deep.
All right. Well, then.
All right. I'll give you some closing statements or closing conclusion here in a second, but I kind of really want to ask you if there's anyone you suggest that I should talk to after the conversation that you and I just had. Where should my next course of plot be?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's lots of people you could talk to. It depends in terms of religion and Philip K. Dick.
Just the style of show that we have here on YouTube. Looking for Easter eggs. It can be religious. If you want me to go that way, I could definitely go that way.
We'll have to think about that. It's a tough question. I can suggest some names. I don't know if I want to do it on the air.
Okay. All right. Well, how about closing statements? Do you have anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, I would. For people who haven't read Philip K. Dick, I would encourage them to do so. A great place to start is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Valis is a fantastic book to read as well. And if you're out there searching for Easter eggs, keep hunting, and I don't know. There's some great, read T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland with a good hypertext, and you'll never run out of fucking Easter eggs to track down, and they're quite beautiful. No, I think I appreciate you bringing me on here. I love talking about Phil Dick. This has been a different angle than I usually get, and I've really enjoyed it. And I'm a booster. I'm all for Easter egg hunting. This sounds great. You know, I guess, you know, just make sure you're not losing weight. Yeah, make sure you're eating healthy, and it's like it's just like the nourishment of food. You gotta watch.
Thank you, sir. Well
all right,
said.
thank you.
For anybody who has ever watched a Meta Egg, please subscribe, hit the bell so that you can get a new one. And hopefully, if you're just a Philip K. Dick fan, we will be talking about him much more in the coming streams. Right. I appreciate your time again, David. Man, it went really smooth.
That was fun.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.